For the third time in my life, I was overwhelmed by the miracle of childbirth. Watching a baby come into the world is a combination of everything good and bad, beautiful and disgusting. Few other words can describe it. I moved from my wife's side to the side of the labor and delivery doctor so that I could better see the baby come into the world. I had done the same thing when my two children were born. Why should this time be any different, even if the baby emerging from my wife's womb was not mine? A miracle is a miracle. Everyone in the delivery room knew the baby was not mine. I was there solely to support my wife in her time of need, for better or worse, as the vows say. It was definitely worse. The child in question was the daughter of my wife and her boss, Simon Green. No one in the room knew that I knew who the baby's father was. Tracy had never told me who the father was, but she had informed her gynecologist and his staff so that the name would be put on the baby's birth certificate, which I was never to see. Yes, things were complicated. According to my wife and I's agreement, I was to leave my home 1 month after the baby was born. As I said, that month was taken to support what I felt I owed to her for 17 years of marriage and 2 wonderful children. The reason I didn't owe her more was because of the infidelity that led to the birth of the baby. She and her lover had been sleeping together for about a year, she admitted to me when she told me 7 months earlier that she was pregnant. I had a vasectomy 13 years after the birth of our second child. To say I lost my mind is an understatement, but she hung in there and didn't tell me who the baby's father was because he had a wife and 3 kids, and she didn't want me to ruin his family. Damn it. He's allowed to ruin my family, and you don't want me to ruin his. You sweet, stupid martyr, I shouted. At that point, it was over between us, but I stayed in the house for the sake of our 2 children, 15-year-old Millie and 13-year-old Gary. After weeks of yelling and fighting, we came to an agreement that I would stay for a month after she had the baby. She said the father wanted nothing to do with the baby, so I agreed to go to childbirth education classes with her, be present in the delivery room, and stay there until she and the baby settle in. Then I'll leave. I'm a tax preparer. It's not the most interesting job. I don't have a military background, I'm not a spy, and I'm not involved with the mafia. But surprisingly, I have some good connections in business, so I'm not completely broke. In 2 weeks, I learned Simon Green's name, address, phone number, bank account numbers, and personal history dating back to 8th grade. I didn't say anything to my wife. I moved to my wife's head as the doctor cut the umbilical cord and handed the baby to the nurse to examine and wash. "She's beautiful, almost as beautiful as ours," I said wryly, brushing the sweaty hair away from her eyes. I realized from the sad expression in her eyes that my remark had hit the mark. Then her eyes rolled back as the quiet hum in the room turned into a cacophony of noise. People began to move quickly, and one of the nurses told me I had to leave immediately and pushed me toward the door. I numbly walked in the direction she indicated. A few minutes later, the doctor slowly walked out of the delivery room. His robe had a lot of blood on it. He told me that something unforeseen had happened. The bleeding had opened up, and he had not been able to stop it in time. He was so sorry, but Tracy was gone. I remember collapsing to the floor before darkness covered me. "Are you going to contact the father to take the baby?" I asked the doctor as he and the nurse brought me to my senses. I'm not sure what we should do," Dr. Robert Crimcat said. "I think I need to talk to the hospital administrator about it." Even though I knew I didn't want to raise Tracy's baby, I didn't want him to go into foster care, especially when there were legal parents around to raise him. I pressed the hospital administration to call Simon Green. I was on the ward when the receptionist called and explained the circumstances of Tracy's death. From what the receptionist said, it appeared that Simon didn't want to take responsibility. I turned up on Simon Green's doorstep an hour later, knowing that his wife, Valerie, had stayed at home. We had met several times in the 6 years that Simon and Tracy had worked together. She was shocked to learn of Tracy's death and wondered why I was at her house and not with her grieving children. I pulled out my phone and showed her a picture of Tracy and Simon's baby. I didn't need to say a word. "That rat bastard!" she screamed. It took a few minutes before I managed to calm her down enough to speak. I explained to her that if she and Simon didn't take the baby, my in-laws, Tracy's parents, would try to adopt it. Even though my in-laws and I were now feuding over Tracy's behavior, I knew they would do everything they could to raise the child, but first, in my opinion, the surviving parent should be given a chance. And it also gives you a great chance to ruin my husband's life and marriage as badly as he ruined yours, Valerie said stiffly. I can't say the thought hasn't crossed my mind, I admitted. But at the same time, why shouldn't a child have one parent? I'm not saying you shouldn't get anything out of it, but I think it should be negotiated between you and your husband. And you should also make sure I don't get arrested and sued when I retaliate against him physically, because that will happen someday. I returned home to my distraught children. My in-laws and parents were in the house too. "You're not going to leave, are you, Dad?" Gary asked as we sat down at the dinner table. "No, Bud. I'm going to cancel my alternate plans. We're going to stay together as a family," I replied. I felt the table become uneasy. I knew what the unasked question was. I wasn't going to answer it until someone got up the courage to ask it. My mother-in-law was going to have to do it. "What about the baby, Damien?" Marilyn asked. "Will we be able to raise the baby?" "That's up to the father now," I replied. "Legally, it's his child. He'll have to terminate his rights before you get the right to raise it." "Are we ever going to see a half-sister?" Millie asked, changing the question halfway through as she looked me in the face. "I suppose that would be up to the child's father if he decides to do the right thing and raise him. Your rights as half-siblings are not as important as his rights as a father," I replied. "If the father allows it, will it be okay to take her in sometimes?" Millie asked, when I felt all eyes turned to me. "No," I answered bluntly. "I don't need a reminder that your mother cheated on me in this house. If you want to spend time with her and your father will allow it, you can see her at your grandparents' house." Without looking at them, I felt both of my relatives crinkle. At least this time I didn't call my late wife a whore, though that would have been inaccurate. The viewing and funeral were difficult. Most of our family and close friends knew of our breakup due to Tracy's infidelity. Most of them knew I had had a vasectomy years ago, so they knew her pregnancy was with another man. While I didn't wish her dead, we were in the process of divorcing, so I'm sure many of our relatives thought my grief was somewhat hypocritical. Hell, I'll admit I thought I was somewhat hypocritical myself. We did have 16 good years of marriage. I wasn't counting the last year. And we were together for 3 years before that. That's the kind of Tracy I'm going to miss. I'll admit, the first thing I noticed about Tracy was the tight t-shirt that seemed to cover what appeared to be a pair of cantaloupes as she and a friend strolled across the Michigan State University campus at the beginning of sophomore year for both of us. She was 5'7", about 120 pounds tall, and most of that weight came from the t-shirt. "Motherfucker, look at that!" I said to my roommate Benji as the two women crossed in front of us. "Wow!" Benji replied. "Wow!" Benji would never become a best-selling author or songwriter. We turned in the direction the two women were headed. I stared at her long blonde hair and firm ass as they walked in front of us. I was shocked, not even knowing if she had a personality or a brain. It was 2 weeks before I learned that her name was Tracy and that she was a finance major. Finance isn't much less boring than accounting, but you can't learn it without a brain. She accepted my date offer. Not only did she look like a goddess, but she had a great personality, a sarcastic vein a mile wide, and was a huge sports fan. Bingo! My conservative nature was completely overwhelmed by this force of nature. All I knew was that I needed to make her mine. By the 3rd date, we decided to be exclusive. On the 4th date, we had sex. From the way she was screaming and shaking, I think I did well. We got married a year after graduation and settled in Denver, Colorado. I got a job at one of the best accounting firms in the state, and Tracy got a job at a large Denver bank. 2 years later, Millicent came along, and 2 more years later, Gary was added to the family. We both had good jobs and were making good money. Life was good until disaster struck. I had no idea it was coming. She didn't increase the amount of sex or turn me off. She was never a bitch to me or the kids. She worked late sometimes, but she had done that her whole career. I worked late sometimes, too. She said the kids went to her parents' house for the weekend. That wasn't unusual. She was finishing dinner, which looked like something special. Beef, good silverware, cloth napkins on the table. Our crystal wine glasses. I thought I might be lucky. All weekend. The food was amazing. My expectations were exceeded when Tracy served chocolate cake with coffee for dessert. Throughout the meal, I waited for her to make some sort of announcement. Finally, she cleared her throat. "I'm pregnant, Dame," she whispered without taking her eyes off the table. I hummed. I snorted. I choked. I threw up on the luxurious lace tablecloth, the end of a perfect evening, the end of my marriage as I knew it. Tracy shrieked as my vomit landed on the table. "Ah, no!" she screamed, jumping up and grabbing a roll of paper towels. I jumped up too, but immediately ran to the bathroom and shook out the remnants of my delicious meal. When I returned to the room, I had already had time to wash my face and wipe away my tears. Tracy had taken the tablecloth off, stuck it in the washing machine, and completely washed the table. "Damn, Tracy, why didn't you just stab me in the heart with a big knife and do it fast?" I wheezed. "It's not like you can be so damn serious." "I'm sorry for piling on you, Dame. I just thought we could have a nice dinner and discuss things like adults," Tracy said. I collapsed on the couch in the family room, my stomach fighting with my head over which part of my body felt the worst. My heart would probably feel even worse if my wife hadn't just ripped that organ out of my body. I had so many questions. "Who? Tracy?" I finally asked. "You don't need to know that yet," she said calmly and quietly. "He has a family, and you don't need to ruin their lives. Why is it okay that your lover ruined our marriage and destroyed our family, and you're defending him? You clearly love him more than you love us," I accused. "I don't love him more, but I care about him a lot," she replied. "We've been having an affair for about a year now. I wasn't looking forward to it, Dame. We were friends for a while, but over time we've developed a connection." Number. We have to have a connection, just you and me. Not you and me, but you and a lover, I said. "But it was never about you and me. It was outside of us, Damien," she said. "You never would have known if I hadn't gotten pregnant. And that brings up another problem. Not only did you have an affair, you slept with him naked. Couldn't you have seen that coming, or didn't you care?" Tracy blushed thickly but didn't answer. "Why, Tracy? Am I not enough for you? Don't I do it for you anymore?" "Oh, God," said I. "Maybe it's not you, Dame," she whispered. "Maybe it's just what I needed. I was a good wife and mother. I'm still a good wife and mother now. I've already told you that this isn't about you or our children. I've never denied you anything. I never took time away from our children." "A good wife doesn't go beyond marriage. You said you needed it. I think that's what you wanted. Big difference, though nationally it doesn't matter anyway. You cheated. End of story," I said. She sat down on the other end of the couch from me. The silence was incredibly loud. "So I guess you told me about the cheating because you intend to keep the baby," I said grimly. "Otherwise, you would have quietly fixed the problem and just said you had some kind of yeast infection to avoid sex with me for a while. From that follows assumption number 2, that you plan to divorce me because you know me well enough to realize that there's no way I'd raise another man's child." Tracy cast a brief glance at me, but quickly averted her eyes before catching my gaze. "Actually, that's an incorrect assumption, Dame. My partner wants nothing to do with this baby, but I'm not going to give up on him. I want us, me and you, to raise this child as our own, she said. My jaw dropped. I felt faint. What the hell? I muttered. Please tell me I've fallen into some strange dimension. My wife can't ask me to raise a child with another man, knowing that many of our friends know he can't be mine. Why don't you just ask me to let you cut off my household with rusty scissors in front of a huge audience? I know it's a big, huge, okay, astronomical. I know it seems crazy, but it's my baby. You can do this for me. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you, she pleaded. Don't do it for your ego. You're a strong man, Dame. You can do this for me, for us. Please. No self-respecting man can be that strong, woman. You're asking me for my man card and the card of my descendants in the next 3 generations, I growled. Forget about the baby for a second. You've been cheating on me for a year. This can't be happening, slut. Tracy recoiled at my remark. I had never treated her so cruelly before. The next day, I was on the phone doing some favors. At least Tracy didn't try to ambush me a week later when she asked to talk to me. She honestly admitted that her partner wouldn't be able to support her during her pregnancy and tearfully asked me to stay in the house with her and the kids, at least until the baby was born and everything was settled. When I agreed, she surprised me with another request. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything else, but could you do labor classes with me again and come to the delivery room again? She asked timidly. I know you enjoyed labor the first 2 times. It should be easy for you. You're right. You know I'll volunteer to go into the delivery room with any woman who asks. Why not with you? It's a deal, but I'll leave a month after the baby is born, I announced. Tracy and I sat the kids down and told them about what was going on when Tracy first started showing. None of the kids took the news well. Fine. Not only is my mother a promiscuous woman, but she's an egregious lecher. The first person who says anything to me will lose his teeth, I tell you what, Millie shouted. Well, maybe my friends will stop drooling over you when you get all big and fat, Gary said. Not necessarily, Gary. Her breasts will be the size of basketballs. Your horny friends will come to the house and stare at them all the time, Millie said stiffly. Tracy began to cry as the children made their remarks. At this point, I would have stepped in and said a few harsh words, but I had no time for that, especially since I had announced my intention to leave a month after the baby was born. Your mother made a mistake, but that doesn't mean she doesn't love you, and that mistake doesn't mean you can disrespect her, especially around me. We'll all go through it, one way or another. Things will change, yes, but she'll need your support and love more than ever, I said. And this coming from a guy who's going to leave after having a baby, Millie snorted. I can't say you're wrong, but my situation as a husband who betrayed me is a little different than yours as her children. Having a baby makes everything more obvious and awkward. I would have divorced your mother even if she wasn't pregnant, I explained. Tracy sobbed even harder and was about to leave, but I grabbed her arm and pulled her back to sit with us again at the kitchen table. You can't run and hide and act aloof. You and your lover created this situation, and you're going to sit here and get whatever rocks the kids want to throw. Get over it, I growled. The kids asked a few questions of both of us. Tracy refused to give me the name of her lover when Gary asked who she was cheating with. He surprised me when he changed the subject and asked if she would at least tell him it was someone the family knew so he could avoid that person in the future. I could see that the question surprised Tracy as well, as she silently studied her son before answering in the negative. Did you at least tell Daddy who the asshole was so Daddy could beat the spirit out of him? He immediately purred in response. Tracy's face turned crimson. First there was anger in her eyes, and then a guilty look. I haven't told your father for that very reason, she said. I'm afraid he'll do something stupid and end up in jail. It doesn't sound like you'll ever do anything stupid, Millie remarked wryly. Tracy shuddered and growled with anger. For the first time in my life, I saw my daughter challenging her mother on what I would call a purely feminine level. "Don't even think about it, bitch! I'm not sure your pregnant ass wants a piece of me," Millie yelled, jumped up, and headed up the stairs to her room. I glared at my wife, got up from the table, and headed upstairs to try to calm my daughter down. It took a few days, but Millie apologized to Tracy for her disrespect, and it seemed to me that as time went on, they became a little closer again. Over the next few weeks, I saw their quiet conversations several times. As I realized, word was slowly spreading in the community that Tracy's pregnancy was not from me. I am neither blind nor deaf, and could see and hear several co-workers and acquaintances discussing my life as I entered the room. I usually received pitying looks from the women and lecherous smirks from the men. Of course, nothing was ever said too loudly in my presence. With my wife, however, things were somewhat different. She told me that as the weeks went by and her belly and breasts grew, some of her co-workers and friends became increasingly brazen in their snide comments and jokes. Mary in the loan department today, when I walked by, said quite loudly that my breasts could probably feed a small third-world country, Tracy told me when I got home. Everyone in the neighborhood giggled. Then Janet remarked that it probably takes a small third-world country to produce my maternity bras. No one tried to hide their laughter as I walked away. I was so embarrassed. She started to cry, and I went over and hugged her lightly. It was one of the few times I had touched her since she had told me about her betrayal. She looked into my eyes, and I could see the underlying anger in them. "I know this all happened because of my own stupidity," she whispered in apology. "I was selfish in so many ways. I didn't pay attention to the rest of the family." Things got worse when Millie came home a week later and reported that her friend had heard 3 boys at school discussing how to find a date for the spring prom. They were deciding who to invite with Millie because, if her mom is such a big simpleton, surely Millie will be too. "Gosh, Mom, thanks to you I've become the school minx, even though I'm still a virgin. I hope you are happy." Perhaps the scariest moment came 2 weeks later, as Tracy told me. On a Saturday afternoon, she and Joyce, her best friend in the neighborhood, were having tea and donuts at our house when Joyce confided to Tracy that several women in the neighborhood had struck up a conversation about Tracy. Allegedly, one of them had heard that she had had sex with 4 different men, and another had heard that she had had sex with 3. "When I tried to defend you and said it was only one, the others called me either naive or a liar," Joyce told Tracy. "God, what an idiot I am," Tracy exclaimed, turning to her friend. For weeks now, we had been getting along pretty well. After Tracy's confession, I slept in the guest room. I didn't know if she was seeing Simon, but I had no desire to be in bed with her. Several times she had talked me into going back to the bedroom, but I assured her that it wouldn't happen until I still had some stuff in the master bedroom, and one night, a little before bedtime, I looked in there to grab something just as Tracy was coming out of our bathroom, drying off after her shower. She was 6 months pregnant and, by my estimation, had gained about 20 pounds, all of it coming from her pregnant belly and huge breasts. I stopped and gave her a lustful look. I'll admit, I've always been a little attracted to pregnant women, and I'd really enjoyed Tracy's first 2 pregnancies. "See anything you like, stranger?" she purred. It had been a long time since we'd last had sex, and I'm sure I was just going crazy at that moment. I immediately pressed my lips to hers, and when she responded to me with enthusiasm, we started. After that, we pressed against each other. I felt exhausted and satisfied physically, but emotionally, I was restless. I had no idea what Tracy was thinking, but I knew that everything we were doing was purely physical. I had no emotional connection to Tracy while we were having sex. It was, as they say, just sex. I needed her to understand that. "That was amazing, Dame, as good as we've ever done," Tracy exclaimed, resting her head on my chest. "We don't need to get divorced. We just need time to work things out." "I'm sorry, Tracy, but I can't get over what you did to me," I said. It was wonderful, but it was just physical on my part. There was no, 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 no connection. You make me so horny with your big pregnant belly. She snorted loudly. I knew I'd just cracked her up, but I didn't want her to get her hopes up for no reason. Even if she wasn't being honest with me, I felt the need to be honest with her, at least about this. Thanks for your candor, babe. I guess, she whispered. Do you two have anything to tell us? Millie asked, as Tracy and I staggered into the kitchen the next morning. Tracy blushed when she realized what Millie was talking about. Smiles shone on Millie and Gary's faces. Tracy couldn't look at either of the children. I'm sorry, kids. I guess we got carried away last night, Tracy whispered. We have nothing to tell you. The smile almost literally fell off the faces of both children. They suddenly busied themselves with their cereal. Tracy and I talked more about what happened after the kids left home to do what kids do these days. I don't want to fight, Tracy, but you looked very needy last night. Don't you get anything more from your lover? I asked. We've been a little colder to each other in recent weeks, she replied. I'm not sure he likes my pregnancy that much. At least not as much as you did last night. She smiled slightly at me, and it reminded me of how things had been until a few months ago. I smiled back, realizing how much Tracy's pregnant body had always affected me. She took my hand in hers. You know, we could at least help each other, she said. You remember how turned on I get when I'm pregnant? And I certainly know you like my pregnant body. There's no commitment involved. Just two. Old friends scratching each other's teeth, and who knows? She shifted her eyebrows obscenely. Damn it, why did she have to ruin all of our lives? Now that the kids are gone, why don't we go back upstairs? She asked. It was my turn to raise my eyebrows. For the next 2 months, until the doctor forbids her from having sex, my 13-year-old son practically records my ecstasies from the hallway, she whined one day after we were done having hardcore sex. No boy should learn about sex by listening to his pregnant mother having sex. Maybe. But as a former 13-year-old boy, I can tell you there are worse ways to learn about sex, I said with a huge grin on my face. She slapped my hand and buried her face in my chest. We fell into a short nap. A few weeks later, Tracy called me at work and informed me that her water had broken. I informed my boss and drove home to pick Tracy up and take her to the hospital. I called my in-laws to come to my house and take care of the kids. The last few months have been so good, Dame, Tracy said as I drove. I really messed it up. I've gotten complacent, smug as a wife, complacent as a mother. I got too close to someone else when I should have been talking to my husband. This isn't about you, Dame. I'm sorry I hurt you, and yes, I'm sorry I did what I did. Will you ever be able to forgive me? I'm working on it, babe. Maybe sometime in the future, after the divorce, we can still be friends. That would be great since we have 2 kids in common. And I'm not going to give up on your parents, I said, smiling. They're very good parents, aren't they? She replied. I really, really want to thank you for this. The classes, the birth, everything. You could have told me to go to hell, but instead we're here. Thank you, baby. Valerie Green turned out to be one hell of a woman. I know I couldn't have done it, but she adopted a love child for her husband and Tracy. I would have loved to have been there for that conversation. She called me a few weeks after we met, the day Tracy died, and told me that she had decided to adopt the baby so that she and Simon could raise him as their own. She explained that she and her husband had a stern come-to-Jesus meeting and it was her decision, not their decision, to raise the child. The child shouldn't have to suffer because my husband couldn't keep it in his pants and your wife died. But he will be the best father to any child when he recovers, Valerie said. There was a long silence while I pondered what Simon Green's wife had just said. She caught my confusion. If you remember, you told me that you were going to get revenge on my dim-witted spouse and that I should have just let you do it. Well, how about your revenge sort of merges with mine? We met in the dark back parking lot of a rather expensive restaurant in town a few weeks later. Valerie told Simon that they had reservations for dinner. He was surprised when I stepped out between two parked cars shortly after he got out of his vehicle. We had met a few times over the years, so he knew who I was. His face reflected shock as I walked up to him and swung my right arm as high as I could. The sickening crack of Simon's jaw easily overrode the pain from my hand. I saw him bounce off the door of his BMW and fall to the ground. He lay there moaning, and Valerie slowly walked around the car and over to me. I handed her the wad of nickels I held in my right hand, and she put them in her purse. I nodded at her and retreated into the shadows, but didn't leave. While I don't consider the two of you equals, Damien assures me that this is the only time he will take revenge on you for ruining his marriage and life, not to mention impregnating his late wife. Unless I tell him that you will return to your hunt for women in the future. You won't retaliate and you won't press charges against Damien because then I'll have to tell the police I didn't see anything. Now give me the keys and I'll take you to the trauma center to have the bruise you got from slipping on the sidewalk checked out. Any questions, darling? Simon groaned, but got up off the ground and handed the keys to Valerie. Valerie has never once urged me to reconsider my opinion of my husband, and I assume he hasn't cheated on her since our meeting of the minds in the parking lot 15 years ago. My children tell me that their half-sister is a wonderful child, well-mannered, intelligent, and beautiful. My in-laws speak well of her, too. I'm glad Valerie let me hang out with her all these years. Ariel, that's what they named the baby girl, knows that she is not Valerie's biological daughter. She also knows about Tracy and how I fit into Millie and Gary's father's life. She calls me Uncle Dame on those rare occasions when we end up at the same event. I don't blame Ariel for anything that happened, but she is a living, breathing reminder of my personal loss. For a few years, I went to a counselor. I'm not sure it really helped. In the last 15 years, I've hardly dated at all. I now doubt I'll ever get married